hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. Ooh.
Hi, my name is Deb Maybury. I'm the host of Reveal, Connect, and Heal. And today I'm sitting with Lynne MacDonell. Thank you for joining me. Another morning session for me. I'm not a morning person, but thank you so much. Lynne is a therapist who specializes in trauma issues, in particularly sexual abuse. Why sexual abuse, Lynne?
That's a good question. There was actually, when I started working in this field, there was no place to send men for sexual abuse. There was no place. There was not much healing for men, and so for sexual abuse, and so I wanted to fill that gap.
Well, I mean, okay, tell us when was that? How long ago was that?
About 15 years ago. I had a small practice on the side. I worked at an agency and I had a small practice on the side. And I started seeing, people would refer men to me because I would see them and no one else seemed to see them. So I kind of fell into it.
I guess that's been kind of the myth, is that everybody knows that women are sexually violated.
Right.
But nobody likes to think that men are.
That's true. Even men don't like to think that they have been sexually abused. They I think, and if they have been, they think they're the only one. So women understand that other women have been sexually abused. Since the revolution, the women's movement, women have it clear that women get sexually abused, but men think they're the only one.
So if they think that they're the only one, is that part of the reason why they do sort of isolate themselves and don't talk about it?
Absolutely. They're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they're terrified that if someone finds out, they will think that they're going to become an abuser, because that's the other myth.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, because I remember even as a child when something happened to me, and I don't even remember learning this, but that was one of the things. Like, I thought, well, would somebody think that I would do something?
Ooh.
And for a man, that's got to be huge.
Because the myth is that men are the sexual abusers. That's the myth. But women abuse as well. And women don't like to think about that. They don't like to.
That's right. We don't want to believe that it's one of us, right?
Yes.
And I've learned that through the book Unlock the Door, and afterwards. And actually, Lynne was in Unlock the Door, so I want to acknowledge that. And thank you for that again.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
It's a great chapter.
As I said when I talked to you originally, I hear everybody's story. I'd like to tell mine.
I have to take 30 seconds. Not even. I was at a conference and announced that I was doing this book, and then this little lady came up to me and stood there patiently waiting, and you said,
I'd like to tell my story.
For once it was. And it's a really wonderful chapter. So back to it with, a lot of the times people assume that it's a male perpetrator. Now, what do you find with the men that come into your office? Is it more that they've been violated by a man or a woman? Or?
Well, I actually run 2 groups, and there's 8 men in each group. And in both groups, 2 out of the 8 men are violated by women. So that's a quarter.
Yeah, that's
25%.
That's pretty big,
Yeah.
considering the myth is 100%
Right.
men. Now, is there a difference or a distinction between somebody who's been violated by a man or a woman in terms of, the shame is this very large issue with men?
Yes. I would say no, there doesn't seem to be a distinction once they get past that initial once they tell their story, they're not more ashamed. They're actually relieved that someone will believe them and that they get a lot of compassion and support. The issue seems to be with me being the therapist, a woman being the therapist. They sometimes have a difficulty with that.
Well, that was one thing that I was going to ask you. You're a woman,
Yes.
and they are men, and they're coming in to see you, to share this information, not only with the men, but with another woman. So
Mhm.
how do you sort of bridge that apprehension that maybe they have?
Well, I've been told by so many men that they sense right away that I'm not judgmental, and that I'm very accepting, and I'm compassionate. So they start to feel safe pretty quickly, but I always have to kind of be cautious, because if I push too hard for them to, sometimes I have to push my clients to hear themselves. And if I push too hard and the perpetrator was a woman, the offender was a woman, they'll push back.
What do you mean by you have to push them?
A good example, someone may tell me that his partner, his female partner, doesn't understand him, and he's very sensitive, and she's very pragmatic, and she doesn't get it. And he's talking to me, she doesn't get that he's sensitive, and he's talking to me in such a pragmatic way, and I'm thinking, perhaps he talks to his partner that way. So consequently, I had to kind of say, well, what words did you use, and da-da-da, and maybe you need to soften it a bit. How do I soften it? This is how I am. And I said, well, it's not coming across that you're very sensitive. And he's like, no, you don't understand. This is how I have to be. And I'm saying, well, it doesn't sound to me like you're sensitive.
In this situation, is he talking to her about the abuse, or just in general?
Just in general about things.
Do most of the guys that come in, have they revealed what happened to them?
Oh, yes.
So they've told their partners or family?
Have they revealed to others?
Yes, not to you.
To me.
I'm assuming.
Yeah, some have, some haven't. I right away try to encourage them to tell their partners. Often they haven't told their parents, and they don't want their parents to feel like they were not good parents. And often they've had a history of maybe behavior that isn't kind of acceptable. Maybe they've had a drinking problem, or maybe they've had trouble holding jobs, or maybe they work 24 hours a day, they become workaholics, and I really encourage men to tell their family what happened to them, so that their family can understand why they were acting the way they were acting. Okay, so I would assume that they'd be, and particularly guys watching this and saying, that's easier for you to say, how could I ever tell? So just maybe give a couple words of advice of how they could possibly approach that topic. Well, I do coaching. I coach them on types of language to use, what things to say, and I also remind them that how would they feel if their child didn't come to, and it didn't tell, and they had to find out some other way. That would be devastating, I think, for most adults, to find someone they loved couldn't trust them enough to talk about it.
Wow. So could that be a way they would start a conversation, as they're sitting down and saying, I know that if this happened to our child, or if it happened to you, you'd probably want to know? Is that kind of a way they could start it? Or?
Well, I usually encourage them to sit down and say, I want to tell you something that I've never told you, because I didn't want you to blame yourself, but I think it'll help you understand what's been going on with me, and I encourage them to say to their parent or their sibling, I'm only going to tell you this, and I really don't want you to ask me questions. As I feel more comfortable, I'll tell you more.
Right.
So it sort of sets the tone that they're just going to they're just going to talk about what they feel comfortable talking about. So they feel a little bit more in control.
Wow, that's really good advice.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really good advice.
There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. Ooh, beyond your